Hello and welcome to And It's Live, part 2 of our deep dive into the interesting season of 95-96. One may argue when the Premier League really began breaking away from the old First Division. David and Adam are here. Good afternoon, gents. How are we, David?
I'm great, thank you. And yeah, you were saying just as we were coming on air, goals, goals, goals. And if I may take a contemporary quote from the great manager, Ron Manager, football, isn't it? But yeah, it did seem, again, sometimes I get that I can get a little bit, romantic and whatnot, but it did seem summer of 95, summer of 96 that, there was Cool Britannia, there was Britpop happening, there was new things on television. There seemed a real sense of dynamism and purpose, and the Premier League, I thought, not only was a huge part of the zeitgeist, I thought it captured it.
Indeed. Adam, you just must be delighted there's some interesting players or more interesting players to talk about in terms of what they do in the pitch, what space they pick up in the pitch, one of which we'll go into in a bit more detail today.
Yes, it's pretty much been Cantona-centric, hasn't it, for a few years? So it's a few seasons, so it's good to get that back. Hat-trick watch will be back again. I think I had that a couple of seasons ago. There's loads of them before Christmas as well. So yeah, good to see some more continental flair, shall we say, coming in, and goals galore.
It is a big thing. See Sky's promo for the start of this season, and it's all about selling this game to the world. I mean, literally, it's going to different countries. It's got shots in the Sydney Harbour Bridge and in Africa, Ghana particularly, for an obvious reason that we'll pick up, and in continental Europe and in South America. And it is very much in full marketing drive now in terms of selling this product across the world, helped by the fact that they have players from across the world. Tony Yeboah is involved in that. Uwe Rösler is involved in that from the Brandenburg Gates, I think. And it's just very, very on the nose, but it's heavy marketing. And David, as I kind of mentioned at the tail end of last week's show, English football needs this. It needs to clean up its act. Euro 96, football coming home is the tagline, but it is England really being accepted back into the fold properly, I think. And they can't have another season of sleaze and scandal and grubbiness. This needs to be fresh, clean, and entertaining. And by and large, with the exception of a couple of things, and certainly an international friendly that lasts about 12 minutes in the springtime, it really gets that. And the start of this season is exactly that. But Sky are definitely pushing this notion right from the top, and it'll be backed by those who govern the game, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that some things can be a process of evolution, but this was a quiet revolution, I think, Martin, because people sat down and said, we need to do this. This is where we want to go, and this is how we are going to get there. And then they pushed it. I think the difference that we'd seen before was, first of all, I think that the money that went into it, that football had never had marketing money like this to spend. Football had never trusted marketing fully, I think, up to this point. I think that it was always seen as something somehow inauthentic, that you didn't want to do it. And the idea that you went out there and sold the game to people, I think, was almost revolutionary to a lot of old timers. And of course, it'd be great if the game could stand for itself, of course. But let's not forget, we're only 10 years removed from teams like Nottingham Forest or Sheffield Wednesday saying we need 22,000 to break even. And if the people of Nottingham or Sheffield want to see us compete for trophies, they have to start coming out. That's about as much as marketing went, 2-for-1 offers and bringing in school kids and stuff to get them over the door. And I think as well, the sense of internationalism that is about the Premier League, through the players who are coming in, of course, but through the realisation that other leagues are going to be doing this. The Spain at the time made no bones about it. They felt they could make great inroads into the USA, obviously, with the huge Hispanic populace there after the World Cup '94. This is the first time I really recall hearing about the amount of strips sold in China, which became in this period. Every new signing seemed to be a judgment on how many kits they would ship in the Far East. But all of these things now, because what you've got businessmen who are coming in to run it as a business, as opposed to, I think, before the local boy made good, the Sam Longs and the Jack Walker, at the end of a successful career, who buy a football club because they're fans and as a status thing and within the local community. It was something that was traditionally done. Now you've got David Dean, I think, is the poster boy for it. But you've got at Manchester United, you've got at Tottenham Hotspur. You've got businessmen who are coming in and saying, no, actually, this is a business. It can make a lot of money. It leaves a fortune on the table. And the possibilities seem endless. So you're always going to hit, I think, traditionalists who will object to any change, really. I know one of your great phrases is if we'd listened to those guys, we wouldn't have crossbars right now, and you're totally right on that. But I think that there was this sense that the world was opening up, and Sky being at the forefront of it, they were very clear that television's the future, but in the future there is this thing called the internet. There are going to be so many different ways to communicate this product and to get it into places that it hasn't been before. And what we cannot have are then, when we're showing this, these Dickensian stadiums full of drunken people fighting. We need to get them out, and it was almost like clearances of this. It was, we are going to remove this. We are going to replace it with something else entirely. And you have to say, sitting here where we do it, the vantage point that we have, they were wholly successful in that. And the Premier League is now, without a doubt, the age-old debate will always rage. Is it the best league in the world? It is the most popular, and that is not up for debate.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole different show about hooliganism in the 80s, but it was the likes of David Dean and experts that they were in contact with. They said, look, if you want to change the culture of football grounds, you need to change football grounds. In other words, they need to be all seated. If they are all seated, a lot of that stuff it can't happen. I mean, the physical landscape around it has changed so much that it really prohibits it, unless, of course, you rip the seats out, which we'll maybe get to in the next episode. If you're new listeners and viewers, last week we looked at the summer of '95 and how some of the teams were shaping up, the business that they did, and the next 3 episodes will be chronological as we look at the season as it unfolds. The opening day probably could have a podcast all on its own. We'll talk about the action in a minute, but there's probably only one place to start, which was match of the day. That Saturday night.
Well, United were scarcely recognisable from the team we've known over the last couple of seasons. What's going on, do you feel?
I think they've got problems. I wouldn't say they've got major problems. Obviously, 3 players have departed. The trick is always buy when you're strong. So he needs to buy players. You can't win anything with kids. You look at that line at Manchester United today, and Aston Villa at 2:15 when they get the team sheet, it's just going to give them a lift, and it'll happen every time he plays the kids. He's got to buy players, as simple as that.
But they have, as Alex Ferguson pointed out, they have got star names to come in. They've got Cole and Giggs, Cantona in due course,
and
Bruce.
Steve Bruce. Still not enough. The trick of winning the championship is having strength and depth. They just haven't got it.
They just haven't got it. Well, we'll see about that. Villa Park then, Adam. Manchester United start their campaign to wrestle their title back from Blackburn Rovers. And yeah, a lot is made about some of those younger faces. And really, as we spoke about last week, the fact that he hasn't gone like for like, getting rid of Ince and Kanchelskis and Hughes, these 3 very, very prominent professional voices, big leaders, and has not replaced them with the checkbook. And Villa, with all due respect, absolutely ran over the top of them. It was 3-0 at half-time. It could have easily been more. And there was this feeling that it really was going to turn into an absolutely embarrassing rout. Must be said, It's Paul Parker that's getting done at one stage. It's Schmeichel that's not looking particularly clever in others. Dennis Irwin actually, I think, gets fouled for that first goal. He's well out of position because there's a foul on him. Can't really believe that goal kind of still stands, but it's a mere detail. Villa were absolutely on top, finding it very easy. Players missing for a variety of reasons in terms of the senior players that they still had on the books. But it wasn't just Hansen. The Sundays were filling their boots as well. What's he thinking about? We told him he was wrong in the summer, and one game is all the evidence we need to confirm our biases and conclude that Manchester United are in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, lots to unpack on that. So, yeah, for me, I think confirmation bias is the big thing there. It's always been this way, therefore it always should be that way. I can't believe you're bringing in young players. This is Manchester United, all that sort of jazz. What I do think is, I'm not sure you'd have had anybody in the immediate aftermath of that match of the day thinking Alan Hansen was talking nonsense. Therefore, when Alan Hansen spoke at that point in time, that gets enshrined and cast, and that's his opinion forevermore, and God forbid he's ever allowed to change it. Alex Ferguson even said he couldn't really disagree with the criticism after it. So it's always one of those things, you get hindsight, you go back and say, that was silly to say, forgetting that you've probably said exactly the same thing at exactly the same time, but because he's on the TV, it means something different. So yeah, I think for Hansen, he said they had problems. They didn't have major problems. Well, they did have problems because they maybe hadn't had the best summer as far as people were concerned, and also they've just lost the opening game of the season. So yeah, that probably constitutes problems. So again, no problem with that part of it. But I think he's maybe just slightly underplaying some of the kids, and don't expect an analyst on Match of the Day back in 1995 to be watching, certainly not an ex-Liverpool analyst, watching Man United's reserve team games, youth team games or whatever, but quite a lot of these players had been playing. Like Neville played the FA Cup final, Butt was playing the year before, Scholes scored a fair number of goals the year before. Beckham, okay, had been out on loan, but had also played as well the season before, as we mentioned last time. So it's so unlikely that they would all be great together, because it's hadn't happened then, and it's happened once since Barcelona, maybe. And even then it wasn't as many. So it's unlikely. So I don't think it's a terrible opinion at that point in time to say this isn't looking very good. The game itself plays a 3-5-2 because he doesn't have some of those players that was alluded to there on the clip. No Giggs, no Cantona, no Cole. So yeah, it's all sort of adding up to, well, that doesn't look great. But I don't think it's the big disaster that it always needs to be painted as. And I think we forget as well that second half, they battered Villa. I watched most of this game. Mark Bosnich was unbelievable. Now, okay, it's the whole game state thing and 3-0, like, and they're going to have more of the ball, that sort of stuff. But they still had loads and loads of chances. It wasn't as if we just gave them the ball and they couldn't break them down. So yeah, if it was me and it was the opening day of, I was going to say Man United right now, but that's a terrible argument. But if it's like an Arsenal or a Man City just now, and they want to invest in youths, and they're maybe playing a different formation because of some injuries, and they have a bad defeat, I don't think I would blink, really. It's just because of where it was at that point in time. So yeah, I can, again, I'm guilty of putting hindsight on this as well, because of course we are, but I don't think Hansen's comments were too out of the ordinary. I think Ferguson probably agreed with most of them. I don't think anybody could have predicted how successful those 4 or 5 players that we're talking about would go on to be for United as well. So yeah, it was a bit of an interesting start.
Ferguson comes out immediately. Davey says, "We've just got to back them. We've got to support them. They'll learn. We've got players to come back." Hansen, he was quite a sober. I thought he was a very, very good pundit, guy to have in the studio. A wee bit more sober, a wee bit more reserved than Andy Gray, for example, who could get quite excitable. So he didn't really come out with many statements, and This is the thing that's been kind of discussed over the last 30 years, Davey. Sometimes it's been completely changed. He said, no, all he said was you can't win things only with kids. And he had Schmeichel and Irwin and Pallister and Bruce and Cantona and Keane and Giggs, who was kind of, and Sharp, these guys kind of standard players. So he was right, but he didn't say that. He said, if Manchester United don't sign players, then they're goosed. And it's very unlike Cantona, very unlike Hansen to be as strident as that, I think. So it just kind of taps into that summer of 95 going, what is he doing? Why is he not getting out there?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that struck me as we watched that clip again was how, for something that became so famous and is almost seen as this sort of sneering put down, how mild it is in comparison to what I will watch on a Super Sunday these days, especially when it comes to Manchester United. Criticism by some of the players who were on the field that day, yeah. Because as Adam says, he says they have problems. I don't think they have major problems. So, how critical can it be? It's the line, isn't it? It takes on such a resonance and a life of its own. You still see it painted on the walls around Old Trafford when you visit on a match day. It's such a famous phrase, but that's all anybody remembers from it. But again, I think that what surprised me slightly was he came from Liverpool, who grew a lot of players. Okay, they maybe bought them in young, Liverpool, when he was there. He was one of them.
Succession planning, yeah.
Partick Thistle, yeah. Ian Rush, £300,000 from Crewe, I think it was. Ronnie Whelan arrives from club in Ireland, but these guys would play. They would go in and they would play. So I don't think the model that Ferguson is doing is that radically different from that. However, we have entered a new period. We've mentioned this. This is the 90s, the go-go 90s, Martin. Credit is readily available. Everybody's buying shit. And part of the ethos of the Premier League, which will later find its home in yellow ties, and is transfers. Transfers are liquid gold when it comes to content. But you mentioned something on the last show, which was nobody also took into account £7 million in January for Andy Cole, an outrageous sum of money, in our opinion, back then. And they're doing the stadium. And nobody wants to hear that stuff. Nobody wants to talk about that stuff. Ferguson doesn't want to come out and say that because obviously, United are aiming to be the biggest club in the world and this behemoth that they became. But these are still factors. Bills still need paid. The builders still need paid. And I think that, sure, he could have brought in one or two, £2 million, £3 million signings. But genuinely, why, if you have these players here, and if you don't think anyone's any better, it is a waste of money. It took strength. It took maybe a sheer bit of bloody mindedness. Up here, to any of our English listeners, there's a word thrawn, which is a Scottish word which means being spikily stubborn, and Alex Ferguson is almost a representative of it. That's your dictionary definition of it. And look, there probably were wobbles, even internally after a result like this. The players had lost 3 huge figures, and I think that was the thing about it. Another thing that I think is interesting that never gets discussed, so I'm interested in you boys' views on this, is where Alex Ferguson is at this point. It's very difficult now, as he strides British football, world football history, this enormous figure. And certainly for Manchester United, this whole commanding figure. But he's been successful at United now for what, 3-4 years, really? I know there was a cup win, and but even let's say 5 years, right? At this point, after 4 unsuccessful ones, he's not Alex Ferguson of 5-10 years later. He doesn't have that infallibility yet. They've seen him be successful. They've seen him be unsuccessful. I don't think that there's even a modern comparison now. I look around the Premier League and I can't see someone like that, who maybe Pep 4 or 5 years in, maybe, but City were so financially well backed that it became irrelevant. he doesn't quite have that unquestioning, I'm sure he knows what he's doing thing that he will have even in 2-3 years, especially after this. And for the media, I don't want to defend them because you're right, Martin, rushed to judgment one game. But it wasn't an unreasonable position to take to say you have lost 3 top, successful, winning players who would walk into, in the case of Anson Kanchelskis, walk into any team in the Premier League, and in the case of Hughes, most teams. And I think it can be quite difficult with youth players, especially a group of them, who've been used, as Adam said, they've been in the squad, but they are squad players at this point. I think in Britain we are particularly bad for fixing in an idea on a player when they're young and never taking into account that they might get a bit better, unless they're exceptional. And then, Wayne Rooney, you go, oh, in 5 years he'll be brilliant. But it's almost like you watch Gary Neville play 30 games a season before. You're still not sure if he's actually the first choice right back. Is it injury? He's a new name. It's quite British, I think, to say that's just how good he is. He's not going to get any better. And I think that we are quite guilty of that. Where I think they had a legitimate shout was character, because you are asking 4 or 5 youngsters to come in at the same time. Ability with a younger player is rarely, if they get to that level, is really a huge factor. It's, can they adapt? Can they do it consistently? Can they survive the slings and arrows? Can they be the factors in the dressing room that's required? And I think what none of us knew, of course, that emerged later from all the biographies of these players, was the influence that Cantona had. Because in our mind, he's the high-kicking, French lunatic of tabloid lore. That we didn't know the fact that Cantona, behind the scenes, was mentoring these kids, and really, they wouldn't have been as successful as they were if he's not in that dressing room.
I think you've hit on something very important, Dave. Yeah, I would agree that the summer of '95, Alex Ferguson has respect, obviously. 5 seasons, 5 trophy, 4 seasons in a row with some kind of trophy. No, it was 5 with some kind of trophy, sorry. And now he doesn't have any, 94, 95. And Blackburn Rovers win the league. And Newcastle United are spending money and looking dangerous. And it's presumed, unless Liverpool get a trophy back, they'll be back on the way. They're outspending anyone else in terms of this summer. They'll be. So it's congested, and they're just one of many contenders, and they don't like him. So they've been naturally disposed to him failing anyway. And I think this season turns a lot on its head, because he does have that strength of mind, strength of character. He gets it right.
And Cole isn't a success yet. So Cole, at the moment, they're saying, is he a 7 million?
And also, huge question mark over Cantona. He'll be back, but will he? What? When's it going to be the next thing? Is this just not kicking the can down the road? But we'll get to the end, obviously, and the finale to that FA Cup final, dreadful final. But a moment said, well, there you are. He backed that guy who was a liability in the minds of most people. He backed his youth, and who knows, as you rightly say, David, whether they're cut out to play for such a huge club, so many of them, and it worked. And I think that changed everything in terms of that presence, respect, and then United could really kick on and keep
totally
it
agree.
force.
This
Adam,
is the one where it's like
United.
Fair enough.
Aye.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important when we're doing these not to just say, oh, Alex Ferguson was great and they were always going to win this because it's United and they always do it, because we're not at that stage yet. To my mind, what we've done here is they've lost out in a title to Blackburn on the last day. And then the couple of years before, I think we said in both of those seasons, there's very real possibilities in some of those that they're not going to win the league. So I'm not going to say it's stuttering, because they are doing very well, but he's not. I think David said the word infallible, but at this stage at all. So it's not out with the realms of possibility. He's also not shown that he's going to trust in youth and have that resiliency and Fergie time and all that sort of stuff. So it's important to think about I'm thinking about how I felt about it at the time, or how people would be thinking about it in time, rather than just saying, oh, what are you talking about? That's rubbish. Because there's a lot of excitement when a new challenger appears as well. I think even now, the years that we've sat through with, Arsenal are going to do it and they're going to beat Man City, and you naturally start to root for them. I was the same in Newcastle at this time, and even to an extent Leeds. We're going to talk about Tony Yeboah coming in, and you're thinking, well, Leeds were there a couple of years ago. You never know. And then in hindsight, you think, well, it seems obvious. They're not going to do that. Newcastle are going to implode or not going to be there. It's difficult. You have to try and think back to where you were at the time, or think back to how they would think about it at the time. So it's never as easy as just the stereotype, if you like.
Amen. We'll take a break there.
Sorry. Forgot to say something. Yeah, just go. It's fine.
We'll take a break there. Come back with plenty more goals and strikers and games to talk about. We'll stay on the opening day, guys. Just a couple of things. Stan Collymore, Adam, lot riding on him. British transfer records. Liverpool at home to Sheffield Wednesday. Lot of boos, lot of waste of money, because again, there's definitely this feeling of who do you think you are spending this kind of money? That's obscene. How many hospitals could you build with that, etc., etc. What a goal!
Absolutely terrific. Yeah, I think. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry.
I've got a tenner on Leeds 2-1 tonight. Calvert-Lewin winner.
Sorry, I was trying to.
What's that, mate?
I was trying to get Ray to go from here, so sorry.
I know.
Sorry.
It's Everton Leeds at the Hill Dickinson, and Calvert-Lewin is categorically scoring the winner tonight. So I've got money on it because it's written in the stars.
I'll just kick us back off, Adam.
Okay, sorry.
Welcome back. We're still on the first day. A couple of things to talk about. We'll start at Anfield, Adam. Huge pressure on Stan Collymore. Sheffield Wednesday fans giving him a lot of stick. There's a lot of waste of money. And at this time in British football feels completely ridiculous now, given the kind of money that changes hands. But almost this, who do you think you are spending that kind of money on a single footballer? How many people could you take out of poverty and all that kind of jazz? Collymore gets it for quite a while and then pops up with a wonderful strike, but it's kind of typical of what he was doing for Forest. But he couldn't ask for much more on his debut and all that.
No, absolutely not. I think it's fantastic. Like we said last week, it should have been a terrific signing. It should have been a decent partnership with Robbie Fowler. I just never really sold on this Liverpool team. The 3-5-2 at points here, and Steve McManaman as a 10 and a 3-5-2 as he did at times is just a bit. And
for listeners, we should point out that Adam views 3 at the back the way that most people would view a dog turd in the street.
Which I'm sure is probably not going to be popular, certainly at this time. But I guess it's the way they do it as well, because it is 3 at the back with fullbacks as wing backs as well, which I don't love. They did score a lot of goals, and weirdly they did concede a lot of chances, even with. So you're thinking, right, you've got fullbacks, but you're putting them really advanced. In my mind, it just makes more sense to at least have one of them as a winger or wide player, especially when you've got someone like McManaman now, off the ball ability, etc. Maybe not the one for Steve McManaman in terms of pressing and tackling and all that sort of stuff. So I can understand it, but yeah, just felt a little bit clunky. And maybe it's one of those things, you could have the best 2 strikers in the world. If you can't get the ball to them or keep the defence, keep the opposition out for scoring goals, then it's going to go one way. But yeah, I certainly didn't think this on the day, because it was Collymore's day, wasn't it?
Sure was, Davey. St James's Park. A lot of excitement, expectation around there. Coventry City came. Newcastle comfortable in the end. They were one up quite early, and then it took a penalty with about 7 minutes to go to make it 2. And then Les Ferdinand scored a third, and Les Ferdinand continued to score and score. I think he got 4 in his first 4 games, and Ginola, again, it's hitting the ground running kind of stuff, Davey. Everything you dream of, surely, as a manager. The trip to Hillsborough at the end of August, and Ginola wrapped one in, and it was just an absolute stunner. Peter Beardsley scored the second, again a stunner. Entirely sure he meant that. And bless them, Sky interviewed both of them side by side after, and it's quite the contrasting portrait of humanity there. But things are flying at Newcastle, though, because those 2 signings, we talk all the time about the jeopardy, and you never know, chemistry, and bang, away we go.
You can't accurately describe to people who weren't around at the time just how impossibly glamorous the whole Newcastle project, and it was a project, seemed at the time. Their signings were always exciting players. We mentioned last week, even Warren Barton they're bringing in. He's very modern fullback. He was somebody who would get forward and contribute to attacks. Ginola is an interesting one, because I think when you sign a player who's had a bad spell at a club, there's sometimes a confidence rebuild job to be done. Well, there wasn't with him. His view on it was that at Paris, the reason it had gone wrong was them. It's not me, it's you. So he arrived actually the opposite, with a point to prove, and he'd felt stifled in Ligue 1. And of course, famously, I think it was Gerard Houllier who kind of publicly made him
disgraceful management. Yeah,
it was terrible. Yeah, it was scapegoat to them for France not getting to the World Cup. So I think that he felt, and obviously the Cantona example was there, somebody who very much felt straitjacketed in France, and he had a manager there. I remember that the first night, Kevin Keegan on Match of the Day saying, he told me his manager got onto him at Paris for playing too much golf. I told him he could play golf every day if he plays like that. And it's a jokey throwaway line, but it sticks with me, because what he did was he freed him, and he told him, on you go, I'll get guys who'll do your running for you. You just go and play football for me. Keegan as well was so glam at this point, especially I think to people our age, Martin, because we hadn't seen him play, but we knew the legend and the romanticism of him going to Newcastle, and I never really got to see much of Kevin Keegan the footballer except in his latter days, but I had a Kevin Keegan bathrobe that was bought for me. I assume that was on sale at a local market stall, quite cheap, almost Only Fools and Horses style. But yeah, he was this huge iconic figure, and he just sort of arrived into management. And back then that didn't happen really at a club like Newcastle. Now we're more used to sort of ex-players, but you were expected still back then to serve an apprenticeship. Ferguson, of course, had had success at Aberdeen. Bruce Rioch has got the Arsenal job, but he's got it after sterling work at Bolton. You were kind of expected that you should have proved yourself before you got to these clubs, even if it was low down the chain, which doesn't happen so much now. But they were exciting. They were absolutely everybody's second team in this period. I don't think there's much doubt about that. And I think at this point, what was most impressive was there were genuine whispers of, did they get the better end of the coal deal at this point?
Yeah,
people were asking that.
They've invested that money very well, it would appear. Well, they're flying, and Keegan makes a lot of that, especially when they've dropped points, because we go around the country, and fans of the team that we're meeting will say, if my team can't win the league, I hope it's yours, and it doesn't matter really, but it did matter to him, that notion of likability and that kind of romanticism around it. And yeah, you don't have to bother David, just go and get a back nine in somewhere, as long as you do. Probably not sustainable, but Newcastle flying. The first or maybe the second Monday Night Football, second weekend of the season, Liverpool went to Elland Road to face Leeds United, and Tony Yeboah scored a goal that nearly propelled me off my chair, and it wouldn't even be the best goal he scored in a run, really, for Leeds United. Adam, I think he scored a hat-trick at Wimbledon, and the second one, I think, was even better than the Liverpool one. But it really was adding to this idea of cosmopolitan internationalism. But just look at the goals that we've seen in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season and how good they are. All of these forwards that you'd be reading about in either Shooting Match or 442 or World Soccer, or whatever age you were. And it's all happening. Like and we're going to talk about a couple of others in a minute. But all of them seem to just be absolutely firing. This is going to be great this season.
I think I said continental earlier, but you've nailed it with cosmopolitan. That's probably a better one. Yeah, Yeboah was so exciting because, again, not huge amounts of it. We spoke about maybe players that couldn't play between the lines. We never really had sort of those exciting players that you might think could play a couple of positions, like players that could play on the wing or could play up front. Someone like Tony Yeboah would probably be a wide forward now in a 4-3-3, but it's just bringing in these players that just make you think about football in a different way, which is great. It's not just in these little boxes anymore. Some spectacular goals for Yeboah. I probably think this one is better for my money. I think it's a little bit more Jesus. And I remember it coming in. I remember seeing it and I was like, wow, that probably was the best goal I'd ever seen at that point in time. I think just in terms of the wow factor of it. And yeah, lots of excitement. We're going to obviously come to important players. I think in terms of maybe how teams go on to play, other players that come in after them, players that define roles, all that sort of stuff. But for sheer excitement, I don't think Tony Yeboah's goal and his start to his life was is definitely right up there for me.
Yeah, and the strip as well. I love that Leeds United strip with the kind of high neck, tight.
Yes.
So on Yeboah, who's built like a tank, it looks great. And then you've got the more old-fashioned throwback, kind of more 90s, I'll be honest, because that Leeds thing was a wee bit more, well, what was it? Because the Kappa Roma stuff, the Italian stuff that's going to happen a few years later, it's maybe a kind of forerunner to that. Newcastle were right in the zeitgeist with the kind of bigger strips, the lace, and certainly that away one with the kind of purple and or maroon and navy blue, maybe. There's a lot going on strip wise, but
Leeds is like cuffs, but on your collar. It's a weird, I don't know how you would describe it, like a polo neck without the polo bit. I don't know.
The Liverpool collar this year, though, I don't know.
It's a cricket one.
It's really bulky. It would not fly now. There's no way. So,
that's a cricket jumper collar.
It's massive and it's itchy as well. So I was surprised more players didn't complain about it. But I think that some of the the kit design has changed. I urge anyone who hasn't done this in a while, if you haven't watched any of the footage, or even just go back and look at some pictures on Google Image or whatever. The strips are enormous. They're absolutely huge, and I know that's maybe like against the 80s, where the shots were, quite frankly, I think should have been.
It is, isn't it? I mean, and it is in fashion and pop music as well, right? I mean, it's everything is that kind of hint of grunge, hint of space, but it's not great
for a sportsman.
A sports where aerodynamics, maybe not in the English game, but it's got to be a factor, right?
Oh, 100%, and they're heavy as well. I mean, if you do the material, I collect football tops, as you boys know, and the kit, it's heavier than it was in the 80s. I have 80s kits and I have 90s kits. The material is thicker than it was in the 80s, and you'll remember a friend of ours, Ali, who'll be watching, when our football team had a match in Seville in Spain. He wore a 1996 vintage jersey, and it was like wearing a parka over there. But again, it's just the sheer. But then it does add. I mean, we just mentioned David Ginola, didn't we? And I bet you just your mind's eye, him with the shirt billowing, the hair
That's what I
going,
mean.
heading
That's what I
down
mean.
the wing. It was so glam.
It's like Wuthering Heights. I mean, yeah. And some of the design, certainly at Umbro, I mean, David Seaman's goalkeeper jersey probably been the absolute apotheosis of far too much gear being taken in some of these studios, and not just in Loaded and wherever else around the time, but very much of the age. Another goal-scoring machine, Adam, and a partner for that machine, feeding the machine, is at Highbury under Bruce Rioch now, who's going to fall out with his goal-scoring machine. But Ian Wright gets off to an absolute belter as well, and scores in quite a few of those opening games. I think we talked last week about the promise of the Bergkamp through ball, the threaded pass, and Ian Wright absolutely devouring those kinds of opportunities. Bit of pressure on Bergkamp again. A big risk. People forget how big a risk that was for Arsenal to pay that kind of money for someone who had not enjoyed life in Italy. And it's funny, isn't it? Sometimes people or players come away from a torrid time and are so liberated at a new club in a new league that they hit the ground running and they never stop. Some are ruined by it, just absolutely ruined by that spell in their career. They can never quite get their form back. It took him about 8 games to score, Adam. Sheffield Wednesday, I think, were the visitors later on in September, and he scores 2 goals that are just incredible, and he's off and running. But from an assist point of view, that those signs were quite evident early on. And as I said, Ian Wright, thank you very much. He's going to enjoy a bit of fun here.
Yeah, eventually, I think for sure, and that's the way it does work. I guess the immediacy that we need now is if players play a couple of times together and they don't automatically score an assist, then they're sort of cast away. But yeah, that whole he's failed in a big league or a bigger league, can he do it here? I can't remember at the time, but I'm fairly sure in those opening weeks of the season that would have been one of those where he can't.
100% it was.
He can't run. Look at the size of him. He can't head the ball. Like all that sort of stuff, and it just goes to show. I guess players need to acclimatise to the club, to the league, to everything. We know he had issues with flying as well. Therefore, it's not exactly someone who's going to be gregarious and outgoing and all that sort of stuff. So all of these things need to be taken into account. Ian Wright is just a perfect partner for him. Probably, to be honest, the perfect partner on and off the pitch. To be honest, but with what we know about Wright's personality, what we've seen in later years as well in his media career. So I don't doubt he had a huge impact there. Bergkamp's autobiography is really good. It's really worth a read. I'm sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Have read it, but yeah, and it's this modernising. It's this number 10 coming in. They're still getting called a strike partnership because that's just how language works, I guess. But it just makes perfect sense. You've got this guy who can turn on a not mega. What was the thing? No, I can't remember what the not mega, whatever it is in a phone box. Can't remember what the actual word in the middle is. But he was pretty good at playing football. I think we'll say. So it's like, okay, we'll still have the high balls. That's fine. I can bring it down, and kind of similar to Cantona, I've got a bit of physique about me, but what I have got is just unbelievable vision. Ian Wright will just go. Ian Wright can come deep outside the box, inside the box. Ian Wright was so good a couple of years before. I think we were speaking about him in a deep dive, and this is the perfect partner for him. Spoiler alert, but obviously they don't hit the top end of the table in this season. I think they'll probably be quite disappointed in that because it's a really, really good partnership that they get going, but it just takes a little bit of time.
How did defences deal with that, Adam, in England? Has Cantona started conversations about how to deal with players who are not standing and occupying spaces that we would assume and have assumed ever since I've been a professional footballer they will? Are they getting round to that kind of player? Because again, look at some of the early analysis on Sky, who are enjoying their toys, by the way, and been able to use diagrams to the best. Bergkamp's so deep, picking the ball up, but then being able to drive and again thread those passes through. How are Premier League defenders adapting to that?
Badly, I think. Maybe that's why you see so many of these goals as well. And if you look at some of the goals, like the Yeboah goal is probably an example of it, and a couple of others. more sensational goals is because space is appearing. That's this thing where it's not just a corner and it's being headed out and someone smashed it in from the edge of the box. There's like in play moments where you're seeing sort of counter attacks and transitions that you maybe hadn't seen before. And I think this is all to do with the manipulation of space. There's all to do with Bergkamp coming deep, Ian Wright playing off the shoulder. It leaves a bit of a gap in there. Defenders are not quite sure. One or two of them, okay, I'll stay with Wright. One will probably come in with Bergkamp. What does the centre mid do? Here's someone else coming off the wing to go and smash one in. So I think it's just really, really transitional, and I probably mean that in both ways that I would say that word. It's adapting to what's there, and also counter-attacking means there's lots more space. So there's goals being scored from areas of the pitch and goals being created in ways that weren't before. And whether someone like Bergkamp is directly involved in the goal or not, I think his presence there, same with Cantona, his presence there just forces defenders to think more than let's just defend the space in front of me and this guy who's right up against me, do we go, do we drop deep? So not quite crystallising at this point, but you can start to see some of it. And obviously Zola comes again and offers a similar thing, but in exactly the opposite physical way as well, which is fascinating, because you're thinking, well, you can't really deal with him in the same way either, because he's not going to go back to goal. He's going to want to drop. So it's fascinating how they adapt, and we can look at that in more detail as we go through, for sure.
We will. I mean, Arsenal do start really well. I mean, they're unbeaten, I think, until maybe the 8th league game of the season, and then we'll get into that as we go. But it's a pretty disappointing one in the end. But there will be changes afoot pretty quickly. David, thoughts on Bergkamp, Wright, and that impact? I mean, if anyone has any doubts, by the way, about the pressure on Bergkamp that was building, that first goal against Sheffield Wednesday, just listen to the commentator reaction, the crowd reaction. Finally, this guy has scored. He's off the mark, and away he goes.
It was very binary, wasn't it, back then? That strikers score goals, and if they don't score goals, then they're useless.
Back then?
Well, yeah, it's fair. But I think we do appreciate now that players could be more creative outlets and whatnot. I was just thinking, actually, when you were saying, I'd forgotten it was 8 games, and you started slow, but I'd forgotten it was that long. Thierry Henry, I think, was 11, wasn't he, before he got going? So there's hope for Gyökeres yet. Fans. Don't panic. But I think with Bergkamp, the pressure on him, because the fee was enormous, it was $7.5 million, which again, I know Collymore breaks it, but that was a lot, and a lot for Arsenal to pay, a lot for Arsenal to invest. One of the big bugbears of George Graham's tenure there was he felt he'd earned the right to bigger transfer fees, and they were willing to invest. And I think there was this sense of he's failed in Italy. We kind of want him to fail here as well, because otherwise Italy's a better league than us. And it's not. It is at this point, but it's a different type of league. He felt hugely inhibited by the tactics, by the structure, by everything that was asked of him there in Italy, and he didn't feel particularly loved. He didn't feel, and Martin, I'm intrigued by this, because you were there at the time. When they signed him, I was a little, okay, because he didn't seem Arsenal-y. And again, we now know Arsenal after 20 years of Wenger as a completely different entity to the Arsenal that we knew in 1995. That Arsenal had been, go back and read Fever Pitch to anyone who's not read it in a while. He describes a cynical last man foul in a cup final as Arsenal-esque. 1-0 to the Arsenal. I know it's an ironic chant now, but that's who they were. They were long ball merchants. They were physical. They were defensive. And yet they're signing this guy who's going to come and revolutionise, really, along with Cantona. This position. It was a big brave signing.
It was.
And I'm glad they stuck with it. But Adam made a very important point. Him and Wright. The fact that Wright was there and established, and Wright is telling people, this guy's great. This guy's great for me. We're going to succeed. I think was a huge help to him.
one of those beautiful contradictions in football, isn't it? That certainly the Arsenal under Jos Graham, his nickname was Stroller, wasn't Cruncher. He was a ball playing midfielder. He was class, and very much looking for something a wee bit different when it came to being the boss. I think we said before, Wenger gets credited, and much of it for good reason, with the kind of revolution at Arsenal. But Bruce Rioch and Dennis Bergkamp are the handmaidens for that, for sure. And we'll talk a wee bit more, I think, about Bruce Rioch near the end, because it does go wrong, but for maybe other reasons. We'll take a break and we'll wrap up a couple of other bits and pieces after this. Welcome back. Just one club to look at before we look at two games in particular, and that's Blackburn Rovers, guys. Champions of England. Kenny Dalglish says, thanks very much, I'm going to be director of football, which means sitting in the house, I think, and watching telly. Doesn't really start ominously well, to be honest. Shearer's still scoring bundles, and he'll again be phenomenal this season. It tells you how phenomenal he needs to be, given the kind of season they have. They lose to Manchester United. Manchester United, who, by the way, quickly respond to that Villa defeat. Quite a few wins on the bounce. Quite a few of those players. Who scores the goal at Villa Park? It's David Beckham, and it's whipped in, and he scores the winner at Blackburn. And you see Shearer's face just that night trudging off, saying, like, what the have I got to do here? I can't kind of carry this team on my own. They go to Anfield as well, and they get scudded, to be honest. I mean, Liverpool really, really do them in. And Davey, it's everything is right there immediately. This is spent. This team have achieved, emotionally reached their level. And if anyone was playing or paying close attention, this would be Shearer's last year, but others would be following shortly, and this whole thing was going to get sold for parts.
They're sated. That's exactly it. The hunger and drive isn't there from the top down and within the club. It's a huge signal from the manager, and it's also a huge signal, I think, Martin, that Liverpool are out spending 8.5. United 7 on one player, 7.5 at Arsenal, and Blackburn aren't doing that anymore because they've won the league. And I mean, we know that they have a ludicrously bad, like I still mentioned, bad Champions League campaign. There just seemed to be no impetus whatsoever to go and continue that. Because this is not a club with a history of winning. They're not a club with a history of dynastic success. This is not a club, in all due respect, that will command media attention unless they are up the top end of the table. And it just seemed that was it. They'd climbed the mountain, and now they were going to come down it. And there was... I know we mentioned this last week, but the signal Dalglish going and being replaced by Ray Harford gave, even then, this is not hindsight, was, wow, okay, that's not, with all due respect, Ray Harford should not be managing the champions of England at this point. And you did wonder, is Dalglish getting it now because that's it done? I've achieved what the mission statement was. And we know that this is the case, and we know that this eventually ends in 99 in relegation because it's downward all the way. Shearer, I think, now is beginning to look round. And Kevin Keegan wasn't particularly subtle, by the way, about his admiration of him. And as we know, he's a diehard Geordie. But in the papers, even early in this season, United want Alan Shearer, Newcastle want Alan Shearer, Liverpool want Alan Shearer. You know, it was everywhere. I think he does well to keep the focus, especially with the pressure he was under with England. People forget that I don't think he scored for England for 2 years going into Euro 96. And Terry Venables told him, "You're my number 9, don't worry about it." And of course, he was rewarded with a very fine performance at Euro 96. But there is that individual pressure on him to try and retain his England place ahead of what is going to be an enormous summer. But yeah, just it was a squad that seemed to let out a collective breath after it had climbed that mountain and then went, that's us really. And there was no real, and to be honest, with the exception of Shearer, nobody really comes close to ever achieving similar in their career again.
Do you think they just thought in that summer the number one thing is keeping Alan Shearer here, and it's almost like we can only focus on one thing at a time, and Kenny Dalglish maybe sees the writing on the wall, maybe doesn't, but they just thought we need to keep Shearer and nothing else really matters. And to be fair, 3 or 4 hat tricks before Christmas probably means that is fair. But yeah, I wonder if they just dropped the ball in one too many ways.
Yeah, big clubs consume success and digest it and are hungry again. When it happens to effective lottery winners here, Adam, right? I mean, indeed, Jack Walker built his company. I mean, he didn't win a watch here, but £300 million all of a sudden is in his possession, and he's achieving that dream. Well, the dream's been achieved. You still need to be able to sustain that success. That's why these things, there's a big crash when you race into that ceiling. You kind of hit the floor. It's not a dreadful season. I mean, they finished 6th or something like that. And again, Arsenal, we've talked about, finished 5th. I mean, it's not awful, but it's a big drop when you've won the league, and it just looks like this guy's just kind of carrying you all that way. And yeah, I think it might have been the summer of '96 when it looked like he was going. I think they offered him like player manager or something like that. At the age he was, just you can pick the team and like
you can do anything. The thing that I think that this is one thing that hasn't changed in football, Martin, and Leicester City are a fantastic example of it. When it is your dream and you think it'll never happen, and then it does happen, and you're not used to it, you are kind of sated then. And then Leicester were the same after they won. They had a very good side. They had Jamie Vardy, who was there, equivalent of Shearer, club legend, and they, for a couple of years, are still very good. They're getting into Europe. They were finishing, I think they missed out in Champions League twice, didn't they, on the last day? They were 5th 2 years in a row. They won the FA Cup. But there's always a sense that at one time this will end, the players, will move on and we won't replace them with better one. There's not that demand. It's just enjoy this while it's happening. And players pick up on vibes at clubs. They're human beings in much the same way that you or I would pick up on vibes at our place of employment. Walker has taken a back seat. He's, right, I've got it, I've done it. That's it. That's what we set out to do. Dalglish has done it. He's stepped up. And the other thing as well that we should mention, because I'm talking a lot in abstracts here, they didn't like Harford, particularly as a manager. No. And they've spoke, the players who were in that dressing room spoke about it, that they had real trouble he was not a Carlos Queiroz style number 2 who would do the tactics, and that he was your traditional British number 2. And I think that it's been mentioned, some of the players' books, they looked at Kevin Keegan, they looked at Alex Ferguson, and they looked at Ray Harford, and they went, we're not serious about this because we're going up against these guys. We had Kenny Dalglish, and now we're going up against these guys with a first-team coach.
Plenty of sports stars, usually individuals, have talked about the depression of achieving your dreams because it's over. What else is there to strive for now? And was it really as good as I imagined it would be? Can you have that hunger to go again? Watch Rory McIlroy's year with interest, for example. It's difficult. Anyway, a couple of games to look at before we wrap up. October the 1st, 1995. Sky could not have built this up anymore if they had tried. It's a big game anyway. Manchester United versus Liverpool. Liverpool up there challenging as well. But it, of course, is the return of the King. Cantona is back after his suspension. Straight in the team, and in 2 minutes finds Nicky Butt's late run into the box, but there's a lot of brilliant work actually to keep that under control and knock it in. And immediate response, immediate return, and everything is good again. However, as is so typical of English football at this time, there are just too many stars to let someone hog the limelight, and Robbie Fowler is at times unplayable. 2 goals, very, very different, one either side of half-time. The first one, Schmeichel just falls flat on his back, just he doesn't touch the ball, but it's almost just been knocked over by the surrounding force of that sphere being propelled towards the net with kind of jet fuel. And again, a sign of the times, that stand across from the cameras at Old Trafford, now I think called the Sir Alex Ferguson stand, is being built. I mean, there are people in obviously the lower tier, but the upper tiers are being built. And I want to say there's one Worky, who is maybe not a Manchester United fan, who you can see in the back celebrating that Robbie Fowler equaliser, which is very brave, I would have thought.
I always wondered about that, right? Like, I'm pretty sure the work would not be taking place during
done
a
on
game.
that Sunday. I mean,
I'm pretty sure that the workmen were, I think he's at it slightly by
just put a high vis on and just walk in. Yeah.
Is he even a workman? Yes. Did he do that?
A Liverpool fan who can get a ticket and just chucked on a high vis and ended up in there. The second one, I think Michael Thomas puts a ball over. Gary Neville said he can't deal with it. Fowler does, but it isn't blasted. It is just caressed over Schmeichel, and Liverpool look like they're going to spoil the day. However, there's a penalty, and it's a correct penalty. And who steps up but Cantona himself? Of course he does. 2-2, so further ground shifted, I suppose. But he's just so box office Adam. And Ferguson made a point about 5 times in the post-match interview. The hype was ridiculous. Just glad to have it out of the way. Basically, it's you people's fault. And it goes back to Richard Keys, and Richard Keys can't really comprehend that it's him and his organisation he's having a pop at. He still goes on to talk about how the day's all about Cantona because that's the script. But all that nonsense aside, clear as anyone, or if anyone needs to see how important the talisman can be to an already very good team.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're going to find many examples of Ferguson blaming Cantona for anything, really. Yes, he's the one that he protected. Yeah, I remember thinking, okay, he has been. What was it? It was 8 months, wasn't it? Was that right? 8 months that he was out.
Yeah, the January to the September. Yeah.
So now you're thinking, God, that's going to take a while to get up to speed and all that sort of stuff. And the type of player, again, try to think of it in a modern lens, the sort of type of player, fitness and all that sort of stuff. And is it going to take him a while? But yeah, to be fair, it doesn't really matter with Cantona. I don't think. I mean, it's almost like the wrestler, isn't it? Really, when he's playing, it's like he's just this big, forceful personality that kind of doesn't really. Football kind of seems a little bit secondary, but then you've also got an absolutely terrific footballer that just doesn't make football secondary at all. So, yeah, I think I'm sure you guys spent a lot of time on it in the last pod as well. We spent enough time talking about why it happened and all that sort of stuff. For me, best player in the league, has been consistently best player in these shows that we've done. It's great to see him back. Ferguson, this is now, I guess, what we spoke about there. You're starting to see Ferguson turning the screw a little bit as well with the media and all these things, and using players and using situations to play the game. But yeah, ultimately for me, just I like what happens on the pitch, and Eric Cantona gives you those moments. So I'm happy that he's back.
David, just a brief word for Robbie Fowler, who gets very much overshadowed when people talk about this game. Remember this game because
great finishes.
I thought it's just absolutely sensational.
Yeah, it wasn't just the finishes. It's funny actually that you mentioned that. My memory of this game is Robbie Fowler, because I just thought when they were up against it after that early goal, and they were Liverpool, because it did seem this is just set up. This is Cantona and United's day, triumphant return. Fowler grabs that game by the scruff of the neck, and I don't think that we often associate us. I think again, in the collective memory, Robbie Fowler's gone in as a bit of a goal, a poacher, a goal hanger, a Lineker. He was so much more than that, and he drags his side back into contention. First of all, that effort, which is an outrageous hit. It's a stunning goal, and then the calmness and the composure for his second goal. But his movement, he was ripping United apart with his movement and bringing others into play. He was genuinely fantastic. So much so that when United get the penalty, it's slightly against the run of play, even though they're 2-1 down, I would say. But you're absolutely correct in the way that it was covered after the game. It was literally, well done, Robbie, but now we'll talk about Eric Cantona. And I do understand it because, as Adam says, he's a superhuman presence within the game. But that day, Fowler, up against a good defence, a right good defence, he was totally, you said unplayable, and I would agree with it. And he drags his Liverpool side into that game because a few of them are looking shell-shocked in that opening 5 minutes. He said, nah, this is not happening today. It's one of the great individual performances of this year in the Premier League, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. Fast forward to just the start of November, which is where we'll leave here. And again, back to St James's Park, guys. Newcastle United played 10 league games before they welcome Liverpool to St James's. They've lost one. Kind of weird game at Southampton. They lose 1-0. Ginola and Ferdinand between them have scored 15 goals in those 10 games. Absolutely flying. Liverpool come to town. Ferdinand scores in 3 minutes. Ian Rush still kicking a ball into the net in this occasion. Equalises fairly shortly after. Looks like it's petering out. And then a pretty horrific goalkeeping, it must be said, by David James and Steve Watson. Falls in the last minute to give Newcastle yet another win. Adam, they are balanced, they are flying. I think at the end of this weekend, that they're 5 points clear of Manchester United. Nottingham Forest, a Collymore less. Nottingham Forest in third. Arsenal joint fourth, really, and 24 points as well. Then Liverpool, then Villa. But they're quite well set. As long as Kevin Keegan just stops there and doesn't try and tinker or bring in anyone else to kind of upset that balance, they could well be on to finally do it. But they really are capturing the hearts of the nation, really, outside of Manchester and Liverpool.
They totally are, and it's a terrific start to the season. I think you mentioned it earlier on in this podcast, Ginola coming in and just almost like a contrast to Bergkamp, who takes a little bit of time to settle. It's really not the case. I remember thinking at the time how strange it was that they had these two enfant terribles, if you like, coming from France, who hadn't really been that popular in France or with the French national team, and they're coming over to here. In Ginola's case, to a pretty obscure place, I think he'll probably say in terms of where he came from, but I think both him and Cantona probably captured, or they were desperately needed for those clubs. I think Ginola for me was terrific. I loved him. He just almost sort of. I don't want to be too harsh on Newcastle, but he almost kind of legitimizes it a little bit, doesn't he? It's like we're playing this attacking football, and we're these guys. I thought he was brilliant. I loved him. Again, trying to avoid looking at it with a sort of more analytical brain now. There could be things that you could pick holes in with him, as you can do anyone, but just terrific. And yeah, as I said earlier on, when you're wanting a sort of underdog or a new kid on the block to do well, I was 100% rooting for Newcastle this year. Didn't really dislike anyone. I think I've said that before. I didn't particularly dislike Man United. Had a soft spot for Chelsea round about this time, but Newcastle for me, just the way that they played, not sure I was too enamoured with Keegan, but again, that's maybe a hindsight thing after the inevitable breakdown that comes. But some of those games from that season or from these seasons when Newcastle stick in my brain quite incredibly, the Barcelona games, the Liverpool games, etc. They provided some really, really interesting and exciting moments. Ultimately, they come short, as we know. There's no spoiler there, but they start very, very well, and yeah, at that point, who knows what can happen.
Yeah, indeed, it was all on. Thank you, gentlemen. Just at the bottom of the league, just because it's good to know who's struggling. Blackburn are 11th. This is the bottom half. Blackburn 14 points. West Ham 13. Everton, of course. Sheffield Wednesday and Southampton in 12. QPR and Wimbledon in 10. Newly promoted Bolton 8, Coventry 7, and Manchester City. We'll talk about them as the season goes because they are dire. 5 points. So yeah, all set up. Okay, thank you, Adam. It was great fun.
Thank you. No, pleasure. Thank
Cheers.
you. That was good.
Cheers, David.
A pleasure as always, guys. Thank you.
I think if I could relive one season again, not just my club, but just football in general, life in general, the time, it might well be this one. One club we haven't talked about are sitting at 7th place, Middlesbrough. What are they going to do in the transfer market as we approach the window? We'll speak next week. Until then, bye for now.